Most people have it backwards. They spend the first half of their career asking, what can I get? And then they wonder why. After years of effort, after years of showing up, the results are modest. The relationships are thin. The reputation is ordinary. And the bank account is, let's say, not what they had in mind. I've watched this pattern long enough to know it isn't an accident. Now let me ask you something. Have you ever noticed that the people who seem to get the most out of life are often the ones who appear to be giving the most? Have you ever sat across from someone at dinner, someone successful, someone genuinely admired, and thought to yourself, there is something different about that person? And it isn't their clothes. It isn't the car outside. It's something about the way they approach other people. That's what I want to talk about today. Because here's the simple truth I've come to believe. After decades of study, of observation, of making mistakes myself, and watching others make the same ones, the fastest path to your own success runs directly through your service to others. Not around them, not despite them, through them. Now I know what some of you are thinking. Jim, that sounds nice. It sounds warm. It sounds like something my grandmother would cross-stitch on a pillow. But I'm trying to build a business. I'm trying to get ahead. I don't have time to be sentimental. Fair enough. Let's not be sentimental. Let's be practical. Because here's what I've found, and I mean times found as in discovered through hard experience, that most people misunderstand success. They think of it as a destination you reach by fighting your way past everyone else, like there's only so much of it available and you'd better grab yours before somebody else does. That thinking is not only wrong, it is times expensive. It costs you relationships. It costs you reputation. And ultimately, it costs you the very success you were chasing. What I want to show you today is something different. I want to show you through real examples and practical thinking that there is a philosophy, an ancient one, actually that says the amount of value you bring to others is in direct proportion to the rewards that come back to you. And when you understand that, when you really absorb it, something shifts. You stop competing and start contributing. And that changes everything. The philosophy no one argues with. Let me start at the foundation. There's a verse I've come back to over and over again through the years. It's from the book of Luke, and it says simply, "Give, and it will be given to you." Now, I'm not here to preach a sermon, but that sentence, 6 words, contains what I believe to be one of the most important economic and social principles ever written down. Give, and it will be given to you. Not give and hope. Not give and maybe. Give, and it will be given to you. Now you might say, Jim, that's a religious text. What does that have to do with business, with building a career, with success? And my answer is everything. Because whoever wrote it wasn't just describing spiritual generosity. They were describing how human society times works, how relationships work, how commerce works, how reputation works. People are drawn to those who give value. They trust them. They return to them. They tell others about them. And over time, the person who gives consistently builds something that money alone cannot buy. A circle of people who genuinely want to see them succeed. That's interesting to me. You see, I grew up in Idaho, farmland. And my father was a hard-working man who taught me, mostly by example, that you don't take what you haven't earned. You plant, you tend, and then times you harvest. And if you try to harvest before you've planted, You'll stand in a field wondering why nothing grew. That's the principle. Plant first, serve first. The harvest follows. The law of value. Here's how I describe it more practically. I call it the law of value. And the simplest version goes like this. The rewards you receive in life are always in direct proportion to the value you provide to others. Not to your own needs, not to your own ambitions, to times others. If you want a small income, provide a little value. If you want a large income, provide a lot. If you want an extraordinary life, the kind that people look at and wonder about, provide extraordinary value to a large number of people. Now here's where most people stall out. They say, well, Jim, I work hard. I put in the hours. Why isn't more coming back to me? And when I ask them what value they're providing specifically to whom, and how much, they often can't answer clearly. Working hard is not the same as creating value. You can dig a ditch very hard. You can be exhausted at the end of the day from digging. But if nobody needed that ditch, you haven't created value. You've created a ditch. The question isn't how much effort you're putting in. The question is, how much are other people's lives improving because of what you do? That's the right question. Let me give you an example. Years ago, I was working with a young man, driven fellow, ambitious, smart. He was in sales and he was struggling. I asked him to walk me through his approach. He explained how he'd get in front of a prospect, and within minutes he'd be talking about his company, his commissions, his goals, his numbers. I said, tell me something. When you walk into that room, are you thinking about what you need, or are you thinking about what they need? He looked at me for a second. He was honest enough to admit he was thinking about himself. I said, that's your problem. When you walk into any room, a sales call, a job interview, a first date, a business negotiation, and the primary question in your mind is, what can I get from this? People feel it. They may not say it. They may not be able to name it, but something in them pulls back. There's a guardedness that descends. Now walk into that same room with the question, how can I help this person? And watch what happens. People open up, they lean forward, they begin to times you, almost involuntarily, because you are one of the rare people focused on them rather than yourself. That shift from taking to giving is one of the most powerful things you can do for your career. And it costs you nothing to change it. Andrew Carnegie and the Architecture of Service. Let me talk about one of the great builders of the last 2 centuries. Andrew Carnegie, steel magnate, one of the wealthiest men in American history, and a man who, by his own account, believed that the purpose of wealth was not to accumulate it, but to distribute it in ways that served humanity. Now, Carnegie didn't start out wealthy. He came to America as a poor immigrant child. His family had nothing. He worked in a cotton factory at age 13. And from those humble beginnings, he built something extraordinary. But what I find most interesting about Carnegie isn't the steel empire, it's what he did with it. He funded over 2,500 public libraries. He built concert halls. He endowed universities. He gave away the vast majority of his fortune before he died. And he wrote about it with conviction. He called it the gospel of wealth, the idea that those who accumulate great means have a responsibility to put those means to work for the common good. Now here's the question worth sitting with. Did Carnegie give because he was successful? Or was he successful in part because times he understood the power of giving? I believe it's the second one. Carnegie built loyalty in his workers by treating them better than competitors did most of the time. He attracted talent because talented people wanted to be part of something that stood for more than just profit. He built a reputation that preceded him into every room he entered. And when you have that kind of reputation, when people believe that you are genuinely in the business of improving things, doors open that are closed to ordinary men. Serving others wasn't a nice addition to Carnegie's philosophy. It was the engine of it. Part 4. What modern research confirms. Now let me step away from history for a moment and talk about what scientists and researchers have been finding. I've read a good deal over the years about social science, about behavior, about what drives lasting success in organizations. And one of the most consistent findings across decades of research is this. People who are identified as givers, who habitually help others, share knowledge, make introductions, support their colleagues without immediately expecting something back, tend to rise to the top of their fields. The interesting nuance, though, is that they're times, not times the people who give to everyone without any discernment, who say yes to everything, who exhaust themselves serving others at the expense of their own health and goals. That version of giving burns people out. The successful givers are the ones who give thoughtfully, strategically even. They ask themselves, where can my contribution make the most difference? And then they show up fully in those spaces. You see, there's a difference between being a servant and being servile. Servants contribute powerfully. Servile people are simply weak. I'm not talking about being weak. I'm talking about being times, purposeful times in your generosity. And here's the practical payoff. When you're known as someone who helps, someone who shares, who teaches, who connects, who shows up for others, you build what I'd call a times, reputation economy, times around yourself. People remember, people talk, people return, and they bring others with them. That's not soft philosophy, that's compounding. The same principle that makes money grow over time in a good investment makes reputation and relationships grow when you consistently add value to the people around you. The personal side, what I learned from Mr. Shoaff, I want to get personal here for a moment. When I was 25 years old, I was broke. Not just a little behind, genuinely, embarrassingly broke. I had a young family, I had good intentions, I had just enough pride to be dangerous, and I had a list of reasons, excuses, really, for why things hadn't gone the way I'd planned. Then I met Earl Shoaff. Earl was a businessman, successful, well-traveled, and he had a quality I hadn't encountered before in quite that form. He was interested in times me, not in what I could do for him, not in what he could sell me. He was genuinely curious about my life, my thinking, my goals. And he began to teach me. He said something early on that I've carried with me for 50 years. He said, Jim, if you help enough people get what they want, you will get everything you want. I wrote it down. I wasn't sure I understood it fully, but I wrote it down. And over the years, as I built my own career, as I made mistakes and corrected them, as I watched people succeed and fail, I kept returning to that sentence. because it kept proving itself true. When I shifted my focus from building times, my times income, to building times, value times for the audiences I spoke to, the income took care of itself. When I stopped asking, how do I get more people to listen to me? And started asking, how do I give people something genuinely worth listening to? That's when things changed. The audience could feel the difference. People always can. That's what Mr. Schoaf gave me. Not a technique, not a trick, a times philosophy. And philosophies, when they're right ones, outlast everything else. The compounding nature of contribution. Let me talk about compounding a little more, because I think it's the piece most people miss. We understand compounding in finance. You put money in, it earns interest, the interest earns interest, and over time, modest beginnings turn into substantial results. You understand that? The same mechanism works in human relationships and reputation. Every time you help someone genuinely, without calculation, you plant a seed, that person remembers. They tell someone. That someone meets you at an event and already has a warm feeling toward you before you've said a word. They introduce you to someone else, that person hires you, or publishes your work, or sends 100 people your way. You can't trace it exactly, you can't build a spreadsheet for it, but it's real. It's happening constantly around you. The challenge is that most people give up too soon. They help someone once, and when the favor isn't immediately returned, they decide generosity is overrated. That's like planting a seed and digging it up 3 days later because you can't see a tree yet. You have to be patient with your generosity. You have to trust the process. And there's another element here worth mentioning. When you serve others consistently, it changes times you. Your confidence grows. Your skills sharpen, because you're constantly being tested by real problems, real needs, real human situations. Your character deepens, and people can see that too. The person who has been genuinely helpful for 10 years carries themselves differently than the person who has only been looking out for themselves. There's a settledness about them, a warmth, a credibility that can't be faked. Service is not just good strategy. It is one of the most powerful forces for personal development I've ever found. The practical application. Now, let me give you some practical ground to stand on, because this is all well and good as philosophy. But I've never been satisfied with philosophy that doesn't produce action. So let me give you 3 things you can do right now, starting this week, to begin living this principle. First, change the question you ask at the beginning of every interaction. Instead of what's in this for me, ask, what does this person need? Not in a passive, spineless way, actively, specifically. What does this client need that they're not getting? What does this colleague struggle with that I could help them with? What does my employer need from me that I haven't been providing? That one shift in question will change your behavior, and changed behavior produces changed results. Second, give before you take. When you want a favor from someone, when you want an introduction, a referral, a recommendation, make sure you've already been giving to that relationship. Don't walk up to someone with an empty hand and expect them to fill it. Earn the right to ask by having already given. Now, this doesn't mean you keep a ledger. It doesn't mean you calculate carefully before every gesture. It means you build a times culture of generosity, times in your relationships, so that when you do need something, the goodwill is already there. Third, find one person each week to serve with no expectation of return. One person each week. A mentor who deserves your gratitude. a colleague who's struggling, a customer who needs more than what the job description requires, a neighbor, a stranger at the right moment. This practice, over time, will do more for your character and your reputation than any other discipline I know. It keeps you humble. It keeps you connected to what actually matters. And it reminds you regularly that life is not only about what you can accumulate. A word about the long game. I want to address something that comes up often, especially with younger audiences. There is a version of this conversation that sounds naive, where someone says, just be generous, and everything will work out. And people roll their eyes. And honestly, they're right to, if that's all that's being said. What I'm describing is not magical thinking. It's not a guarantee that every kind gesture will be repaid, or that good people always prosper quickly, or that the world is perfectly fair. It isn't. But I've lived long enough to watch the long game play out. And what I've seen consistently across different industries, different personalities, different countries, is that people of genuine value and genuine service tend to thrive over time. Not always immediately, not without setbacks, but over time. And the people who made it all about themselves, the ones who clawed and grabbed and kept score, some of them did well for a while. But the ceiling was low, and the loneliness, the professional loneliness of having no one who genuinely wants you to succeed was real and hard. Here's something I've said for years and believe completely. You don't build a great life alone. You build it with people. And the quality of those people and the depth of their loyalty is largely determined by the quality of what you have offered them. That's not a soft idea. That's how the world actually works. The legacy question. I want to ask you a question before we close, and I want you to sit with it. When you are gone, and one day all of us will be, what will people say about what you contributed? Not what you earned, not what you accumulated, not what title you held. What did you times give? What problems did you solve for people? What did you teach? How many people's lives were genuinely better because you were present in them? What did you build that served more people than just yourself? These are not sentimental questions. They are the questions that actually define a life. And the beautiful thing, the thing I find so encouraging about this whole philosophy is that you don't have to wait until the end to ask them. You can ask them now, today. You can begin building that kind of life today with the very next decision you make, the very next conversation you have. The direction you're facing determines where you end up. If you're facing times toward times others, genuinely toward their needs, their growth, their problems, you will end up somewhere worth being.